My name is Daisy, and I was 30 when I met Jacob. We both worked for Global Tech, a large international company. I was a translator, and Jacob worked in the IT department. Always ready with a joke or a helping hand when my computer decided to throw a tantrum, Jacob quickly became a constant presence in my day. It didn't take long for our coffee breaks to turn into dinner dates, and soon enough, we were inseparable. A year later, Jacob got down on one knee in the middle of our favorite park. The wedding was a whirlwind of white lace and champagne toasts. Jacob's parents, Amanda and Blake, seemed nice enough. Amanda hugged me tightly and whispered, "Welcome to the family, dear." If only I had known then what that welcome truly meant. After the honeymoon, we moved into Jacob's apartment. It was spacious and modern, with a view of the city skyline that took my breath away. "This is perfect," I said, twirling around the living room. Jacob grinned. "Wait till you see the kitchen." Mom insisted on getting all top-of-the-line appliances. When I first moved in, I should have paid more attention to those words. I should have asked more questions. But I was too caught up in the excitement of starting our life together. The first few weeks were bliss. Jacob and I fell into an easy rhythm, sharing chores and enjoying quiet evenings together. Then, one Saturday morning, it happened. I was in the kitchen, attempting to make pancakes, when I heard the front door open. Thinking Jacob had returned from his morning run, I called out, "Hope you're hungry, babe." But it wasn't Jacob who walked into the kitchen, it was Amanda. "Oh, hello, dear," she said, her eyes scanning the mess I'd made. "I thought I'd pop in and see how you two are settling in." I stood there, spatula in hand, completely stunned. "Amanda, how did you?" She dangled a key in front of me. "I have a spare, of course. How else would I check on my Jacob-me?" Amanda bustled past me, opening cupboards and peering into the fridge. I watched in disbelief as she pulled out cleaning supplies and started wiping down the already spotless counters. "But we're married now, you don't need to," I began. "Nonsense," she interrupted. "Jacob-me's still my boy, and I have so much free time these days. I'm happy to help." For the next hour, I endured a running commentary on my housekeeping skills, or lack thereof, according to Amanda. By the time Jacob returned, I was ready to scream. "Mom," Jacob said, surprise evident in his voice. "What are you doing here?" Amanda beamed at him. "Just helping Daisy get things in order, dear. You know how overwhelming it can be for a new wife." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Jacob shot me an apologetic look but didn't say anything to contradict his mother. The next few weeks were a blur of unexpected visits and unsolicited advice. Amanda seemed to materialize in our apartment at the most inconvenient times, always armed with a critique and a story about her own domestic prowess. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, she burst in without warning. "Oh, Daisy," she exclaimed, eyeing my neat piles of clothes. "That's not how you fold t-shirts. Here, let me show you." I gritted my teeth. "Amanda, I appreciate your help, but—" "Nonsense," she interrupted, already refolding a stack of Jacob's shirts. "I've been doing this for years. Did I ever tell you about my own mother-in-law?" Now, she was a piece of work. And so began another session of Amanda's favorite pastime, regaling me with tales of her own suffering at the hands of her mother-in-law. She used to come over unannounced, Amanda said, oblivious to the irony. Always criticizing my cooking, my cleaning, nothing was ever good enough for her. I bit back the urge to point out the similarities. Instead, I forced a smile. "That must have been difficult." "Oh, it was," Amanda nodded sagely. "But I endured it, and look how well Jacob-me turned out. You should be grateful I'm nothing like her." "Grateful?" "Right. Because having my privacy invaded and my abilities constantly questioned was such a blessing. As the days wore on, my patience wore thin. Amanda's visits became more frequent, her criticism more pointed. She'd run her finger along the top of the fridge, sneering at imaginary dust. She'd reorganize the pantry, claiming she knew best how Jacob me liked things. Jacob, for his part, seemed oblivious to the tension. "Mom's just trying to help," he'd say whenever I brought it up. "She means well." But good intentions or not, I was at my breaking point. The constant intrusion, the endless criticism, the thinly veiled insults, it was all becoming too much. It came to a head one Sunday afternoon. I was in the middle of preparing dinner when Amanda waltzed in, key in hand. "Daisy, dear," she called out, her voice sickeningly sweet. "I thought I'd drop by and give you some pointers on proper meal planning. Jacob me's always been particular about his Sunday roasts." I stood there, wooden spoon in hand, feeling something inside me snap. This was my home, my kitchen, my marriage, and I'd had enough. Taking a deep breath, I turned to face her. "Amanda," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "we need to talk." Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "About what, dear?" "About boundaries," I replied. "About privacy. I appreciate your intention to help, but coming over unannounced, criticizing everything I do, it's not helping. It's making me feel uncomfortable in my own home." She left without another word, the door slamming behind her. As the sound echoed through the apartment, I leaned against the counter, exhausted but oddly exhilarated. That evening, as Jacob and I sat down for dinner, I knew I had to broach the subject. "Jacob," I started, pushing my food around on my plate, "we need to talk about your mother." He sighed, putting down his fork. "What's she done now?" I took a deep breath and recounted the day's events, along with all the other incidents that had been building up. As I spoke, I could see the conflict in Jacob's eyes, torn between his love for his mother and his commitment to me. "Daisy, I know Mom can be intense," he said carefully, "but she means well. She's just trying to help." I shook my head. "Jacob, I understand that, but this isn't help, it's control. She comes into our home uninvited, criticizes everything I do, and makes me feel like an intruder in my own life. It has to stop." Jacob ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable. "What do you want me to do?" "I need you to set boundaries with her," I said firmly. "Take back her key, ask her to call before coming over, and most importantly, I need you to stand up for me when she oversteps." There was a long pause as Jacob processed my words. Finally, he nodded. "You're right. I'll talk to her." True to his word, Jacob had a conversation with Amanda the next day. I wasn't present for it, but from what Jacob told me, it didn't go well. Amanda was hurt and offended, claiming we were pushing her out of our lives. But in the end, she reluctantly agreed to our terms. For a while, things seemed to improve. Amanda's visits became less frequent and were always preceded by a phone call. But the peace was short-lived. It started with little things. Suddenly, I found myself uninvited to Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. When I asked Jacob about it, he'd shrug uncomfortably. "Mom says it's just immediate family this time," he'd say, not meeting my eyes. The final straw came on Jacob's father Blake's birthday. Jacob and I had planned to go together to wish him well, but at the last minute, Jacob got called away on an urgent work matter. "You should still go," Jacob insisted. "Dad would want to see you." Hesitantly, I agreed. I rang the doorbell, gift in hand, and waited. When Amanda opened the door, her eyes narrowed. "Daisy," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you." This is a family gathering, and let's be honest, dear, you're not really family, are you? Her words hit me like a slap. I stood there, stunned, as she continued. You've made it quite clear that you don't want me in your life, she said. So, I think it's best if you leave now. We wouldn't want any uninvited guests ruining Blake's special day. As if on cue, Blake appeared behind her. What's going on? He asked, looking between us. Amanda's demeanor changed instantly. Oh, Blake, she said, her voice trembling theatrically. Daisy here was just leaving. Isn't it awful how she's pushed me out of Jacobme's life? Taken away my keys, forbidden me from visiting my own son. I felt my face burn with anger and humiliation. That's not true, I protested. I only asked for some boundaries. Enough, Blake said firmly, surprising us both. He turned to Amanda, his expression stern. That's enough, Amanda. Daisy is family, and she's welcome here. He then looked at me, his eyes softening. Please come in, Daisy. We'd love to have you join us. Shocked and grateful, I stepped inside. Amanda, clearly furious, stormed off to the kitchen. As I followed Blake into the living room, I could feel the eyes of the other guests on me, curious about the scene they had just witnessed. The next few years were a constant battle with Amanda. Despite our efforts to set boundaries, she always found ways to insert herself into our lives. Then tragedy struck. Blake fell ill suddenly, his condition deteriorating rapidly. When he passed away, it felt like the world had shifted on its axis. The funeral was a somber affair, with Amanda stoically going through the motions, barely acknowledging my presence. After the service, Blake's lawyer, Mr. Thompson, a kind man who had been his close friend, approached us. Mrs. Walker, if you and your son could join me in private, Mr. Walker left some specific instructions regarding his will. When they emerged, the atmosphere had changed drastically. Amanda looked pale and shocked, while Jacob seemed confused and conflicted. As we drove home, Jacob finally broke the silence. Dad left everything to me, he said quietly. The house, the savings, everything. Even Mom's house. I was stunned. What? But why? Jacob shook his head. I don't know. The lawyer didn't explain. At that moment, I remembered Amanda's reaction. Her face had been a mix of disbelief and anger. I could have sworn I heard her mutter under her breath, "That fool," before composing herself. The next day, Amanda called Jacob, her voice trembling. Jacobme, you're not going to kick me out, are you? This house, it's all I have left of your father. Jacob's response was immediate. Of course not, Mom. The house is yours to live in, and I'll set up a monthly allowance for you. I didn't object. It was Jacob's inheritance, his money, his decision. And despite our differences, I couldn't imagine leaving Amanda homeless after losing her husband. However, our act of kindness did little to soften Amanda's attitude toward me. She stopped coming to our house, but her influence was still felt. She called Jacob constantly, always with some emergency or excuse for why he needed to come over. Jacobme, the sink is leaking. I think I heard a strange noise in the attic. I'm not feeling well. Could you stay the night just in case? Jacob, ever the dutiful son, would rush to her aid, often staying overnight. It was driving me crazy. As Amanda's birthday approached, I braced myself for another round of exclusion. For the past 2 years, I'd been pointedly uninvited from family gatherings, relegated to the role of an outsider in my own marriage. So when Jacob announced he had to leave on a last-minute business trip, I resigned myself to a quiet evening alone. I was surprised then when my phone rang the day before Amanda's birthday. Even more surprising was the name on the caller ID. Daisy, dear, Amanda's voice oozed sweetness through the speaker. I'm calling about my birthday celebration tomorrow, Amanda began, her voice unusually soft. I know we've had our differences, but I'm tired of all this hostility. I'd like us to reconcile. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, utterly dumbfounded. You want me to come to your birthday party? Of course, dear. I know Jacob me can't make it, but I'd love to see you there. What do you say? Part of me wanted to refuse outright. After years of snubs and barely veiled insults, why should I believe this sudden change of heart? But Amanda's voice sounded so sincere, so genuinely warm, that I found myself wavering. I suppose I could stop by, I heard myself say. Wonderful. Amanda exclaimed. It's at the Willow Creek Country Club. I'll see you at 7. The next evening, I found myself driving to the country club, a carefully chosen gift and a bouquet of flowers on the passenger seat beside me. As I approached the entrance, a sense of unease settled in my stomach. I pulled up to the security barrier, where a guard stepped out of his booth. Name, please, he said. Daisy Walker, I replied, trying to sound confident. The guard scanned his list, then frowned. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I don't see that name here. There must be some mistake, I said, my anxiety growing. Amanda Walker invited me personally. I'm her daughter-in-law. The guard shook his head. I'm sorry, but if you're not on the list, I can't let you in. It's a private event. Flustered, I got out of the car and pulled out my phone to call Amanda. After a few rings, she picked up. Amanda, it's Daisy. I'm at the entrance, but they won't let me in. A few minutes later, I saw Amanda approaching the barrier, surrounded by a group of well-dressed guests. They were all laughing, glasses in hand, clearly enjoying the party, which was already in full swing. As Amanda neared my car, I expected her to clear up the misunderstanding with the guard. Instead, she fixed me with a cold stare that sent chills down my spine. Well, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. If it isn't the little gold digger herself. Did you really think I'd let trash like you into my birthday celebration? I stood there, stunned, as Amanda continued her tirade. I specifically chose this venue to keep out unwanted elements like you. Why are you even here? You're not family, you're nothing but a money-hungry tramp who trapped my son. The guests behind her tittered, clearly enjoying the show. I felt my face burning with humiliation and anger. But you invited me. I stammered. You said you wanted to reconcile. Amanda's laugh was cold and cruel. Oh, you poor, naive girl. I wanted to see just how desperate you were to get your hands on our family's money. And look at you, showing up like a stray dog begging for scraps. For a moment, I stood face to face with Amanda, seeing the malice gleaming in her eyes. Then, with deliberate slowness, I dropped the flowers and gift at her feet. Without another word, I got back in my car and drove away, Amanda's mocking laughter and the sounds of the party fading behind me. I drove home in a daze, my mind reeling from Amanda's cruel words and actions. As soon as I walked through the door, I collapsed onto the couch and called Jacob, my hands shaking as I dialed his number. Through tears and hiccups, I recounted the entire humiliating ordeal. Jacob listened in stunned silence, only interrupting occasionally to ask for clarification. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then Jacob's voice came through, low and angry. I'm coming home, he said, and then I'm going to have a very serious conversation with my mother. True to his word, Jacob was on the next flight home. When he arrived, he held me close, apologizing over and over for his mother's behavior. Then, with a determined look in his eye, he picked up the phone and called Amanda. I could hear Amanda's voice, shrill and defensive, through the speaker. But Jacob's responses were calm and resolute. "No, Mom, this time you've gone too far. I don't want to hear your excuses. You've humiliated my wife, the woman I love. No. I'm done. I'm cutting you off. No more allowance, no more help. You're on your own." For a week, we enjoyed a peace we hadn't known in years. No frantic calls from Amanda. No emergencies requiring Jacob's immediate attention. It felt like we could finally breathe. But, of course, it couldn't last. One afternoon, there was a knock at our door. When I opened it, I found Amanda standing there, her eyes red and puffy, her appearance disheveled. "How could you do this to me?" she wailed, pushing past me into the house. "I raised that boy. I devoted my entire life to him, and now, because of you, he's left me with nothing. No money, no support. I can barely afford to eat." She paced the living room, her voice rising hysterically. "It's all your fault. You turned him against me. You're the reason Blake disinherited me. You've ruined everything." I tried to interject, to defend myself, but Amanda was beyond reason. She continued her rant, tears streaming down her face, until she finally collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. After a few minutes, Amanda composed herself and left without another word, leaving me standing in the middle of the living room, confused and conflicted. As the door closed behind her, I made a decision. I needed answers, and I knew just who might have them. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Blake's lawyer in his office. The room was warm and inviting, with shelves lined with law books and framed diplomas on the walls. Mr. Thompson looked at me with kind eyes, his hands folded on the desk between us. "Mrs. Walker," he began, "I understand you have some questions about your father-in-law's will." I nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yes, I do. I need to understand why Blake left everything to Jacob and nothing to Amanda. It just doesn't make sense." Mr. Thompson leaned back in his chair, a conflicted look crossing his face. He seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "Mrs. Walker, I've known the family for a long time, and what I'm about to tell you, well, it's not pleasant. The truth is, Amanda had been unfaithful to Blake." I felt my jaw drop. "What?" "She had a lover," Mr. Thompson continued, "a man who passed away shortly before Blake's death. This man left Amanda a significant amount of property in his will." I sat there, stunned, as Mr. Thompson went on. "Blake found out about the affair and the inheritance. They had a terrible argument, and that's when he decided to change his will, leaving everything to Jacob." My mind was reeling. Amanda, who had always portrayed herself as the devoted wife and mother, had been living a double life. But Mr. Thompson wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, his voice somber. "Years ago, when Jacob was just a boy, Blake's mother, Jacob's grandmother, fell ill. She had saved money for years to afford a place in a private nursing home where she hoped to spend her final days in comfort." I listened, a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. Amanda convinced Blake to sell his mother's property and send her to a state-run facility instead. They kept the money for themselves and rarely visited the poor woman. She passed away not long after, alone and neglected. I felt sick. The Amanda I knew was manipulative and cruel, but this was a level of callousness I couldn't have imagined. "Blake carried that guilt with him for years," Mr. Thompson said softly. "I think changing his will was his way of trying to make things right, to ensure that Amanda couldn't do to Jacob what she had done to his mother." As I left Mr. Thompson's office, my head was spinning. The woman who had accused me of being a gold digger had been the real predator all along, pursuing her own interests at the expense of her family's well-being and happiness. That evening, when Jacob came home from work, I sat him down and recounted everything I had learned from Mr. Thompson. Jacob listened in stunned silence, his face a mix of disbelief, anger, and profound sadness. "I can't believe it," he said when I finished, his voice barely above a whisper. "All these years, she's been lying to us, manipulating us." We stayed up late into the night, talking through the implications of these revelations. Jacob was devastated but also resolute. "This ends now," he said firmly. We didn't have to wait long for Amanda to make her next move. A few days later, she showed up at our door, all tears and pleas for help. "Jacob, she began, her voice quavering. "I know you're angry, but please, I need your help. I have nothing left." Jacob's face was like stone as he replied, "That's not true, is it, Mom? We know about your lover, about the apartment and the money he left you." Amanda's face drained of color. What are you talking about?" "Drop the act," Jacob said, his voice cold. "We know everything, about your affair, about what you did to Grandma, all of it." Amanda's demeanor changed instantly. Gone was the pitiful, pleading woman. In her place stood someone I recognized all too well, calculating, angry, and ready to lash out. "How dare you," she shrieked. "After everything I've done for you. You ungrateful, selfish boy." Jacob didn't flinch. "Ungrateful? You're right, I am. Unlike you, I won't be sending you to a state nursing home to die alone." Amanda recoiled as if she'd been slapped. Jacob continued, his voice steady. "I'm selling the house. You need to leave. Use the money and property your lover left you and stop trying to deceive and use everyone around you." Amanda's indignant screams could probably be heard down the block, but Jacob remained unmoved. He gave her a deadline to vacate the house, and true to his word, he sold it soon after. We later learned that Amanda had moved into the apartment left to her by her lover, evicting the current tenants and having to pay a hefty sum for breaking their lease. She tried calling Jacob a few times after that, alternating between tearful pleas and angry accusations, but we stood firm in our decision to cut ties. As the dust settled from this tumultuous period, Jacob and I found ourselves looking toward the future. And what a future it was shaping up to be. I was pregnant. We decided to sell our apartment and look for a small house, somewhere we could raise our child in peace, away from the shadows of the past. We were careful not to let any news of the pregnancy or our plans to move reach Amanda. The last thing we wanted was for her to find a way back into our lives, especially with a baby on the way. Driving away toward our new home and new life, I felt a sense of hope I hadn't experienced in years. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew Jacob and I would face them together, stronger for having weathered the storm.
"Ellen, I can't keep this to myself any longer. Harold has been seeing someone else. I saw them at the cafe today." Miriam's words hit me like a punch to the gut as we sat in my living room, sipping tea. My hands trembled, nearly spilling the hot liquid onto my lap. I stared at her, my mind reeling. "What do you mean, seeing someone else? That can't be true. Harold would never—" My voice trailed off as doubt crept in. The late nights at work, the secretive phone calls, the distant behavior, it all started to make a sickening kind of sense. Miriam reached out and squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry, Ellen. I debated whether to tell you, but I couldn't bear the thought of you being in the dark. You deserve to know the truth." Tears welled up in my eyes as the reality sank in. After 35 years of marriage, countless sacrifices, and unwavering dedication to our family, Harold had betrayed me. The man I had built a life with, the father of my children, had been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back. "What do I do now, Miriam?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How could he do this to me, to our family?" Miriam pulled me into a tight embrace. "You're strong, Ellen. You'll get through this. And you have me, Claire, and Harold Jr. We'll support you every step of the way." I nodded, wiping away the tears that now flowed freely down my cheeks. A wave of emotions crashed over me. Shock, anger, hurt, and a deep sense of betrayal. How could I have been so blind? The signs were there, but I had chosen to ignore them. to believe in the illusion of our perfect marriage. As I sat there, my mind raced with questions. Who was this other woman? How long had it been going on? Did our children know? The thought of Claire and Harold Jr. finding out about their father's infidelity broke my heart all over again. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I need to confront him. Miriam, I need to hear the truth from his own lips. Miriam nodded. Of course, Ellen. But remember, you don't have to do this alone. I'm here for you, no matter what. I managed a weak smile, grateful for her unwavering support. Thank you, Miriam. I don't know what I would do without you. As we finished our tea, a newfound determination began to rise within me. I couldn't let Harold's betrayal define me. I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for my children. They deserved a mother who fought for the truth, who stood up for herself and her family. I glanced at the clock, knowing Harold would be home soon. The confrontation loomed ahead and my stomach churned with a mix of dread and anticipation, but I knew I had to face it head on. I couldn't live a lie any longer. With Miriam by my side, I steeled myself for the battle ahead. I would demand answers, uncover the truth, and fight for the life I deserved. Harold's secrets would be brought to light, and I would emerge stronger, no matter how painful the journey might be. As the front door clicked open, signaling Harold's arrival, I took a deep breath and rose to my feet. It was time to confront the dark secrets that had been lurking in the shadows of our marriage. The truth would set me free, even if it shattered everything I had once believed in. The tension in the kitchen was palpable as I waited for Harold to come home. The ticking of the clock seemed to echo in my ears, each second dragging on for an eternity. When the front door finally opened, I steeled myself, ready to confront the man I had once trusted with my entire life. Harold walked in, his eyes widening as he saw me standing there, arms crossed. "Ellen, what's going on?" "We need to talk, Harold." My voice was steady, masking the turmoil within. "I know about the affair." His face paled, and he took a step back. "What are you talking about? There's no affair. You're being ridiculous." Anger flared within me. "Don't lie to me, Harold. Miriam saw you with her at the cafe. How could you do this to me, to our family?" Harold's expression shifted from shock to defensiveness. "Miriam? She's always been jealous of our marriage. You can't believe everything she says." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "Stop making excuses, Harold. I've seen the signs for months now, the late nights, the secretive phone calls. I just didn't want to believe it." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his voice. "Do you really think I want to come home to this every day? To your constant nagging and suspicions?" His words cut deep, but I refused to back down. "So that justifies betraying our marriage vows? Betraying the life we've built together?" Our voices grew louder, the argument escalating. Claire and Harold Jr. emerged from their rooms, concern etched on their faces as they witnessed the unfolding drama. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" Claire asked, her eyes darting between us. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself. "Your father has something he needs to tell you." Harold glared at me before turning to our children. "It's nothing. Your mother is just overreacting, as usual." Claire stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Harold. "Dad, please, just tell us the truth." The room fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on us all. Harold's shoulders slumped, and he let out a heavy sigh. "Fine. I've been seeing someone else, but it's not what you think." Tears streamed down my face as the confirmation of his infidelity hit me like a tidal wave. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Harold Jr. stood frozen, disbelief etched on his features. "How could you, Dad?" Claire's voice trembled with a mix of anger and hurt. "How could you do this to Mom, to our family?" Harold's defensive demeanor crumbled under the scrutiny of our children. "It just happened. I never meant to hurt anyone." I wiped away my tears, a newfound strength rising within me. "But you did, Harold. You hurt all of us, and now you have to face the consequences." He looked at me, a flicker of fear in his eyes. "What do you mean, consequences?" "I want a divorce, Harold. I won't live a lie anymore. I deserve better than this, and so do our children." The room fell silent once more, the weight of my words sinking in. Harold's face contorted with a mix of emotions, anger, regret, and perhaps even a hint of relief. Claire stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on my shoulder. "We're here for you, Mom. You don't have to go through this alone." I nodded, grateful for her unwavering support. Harold Jr. remained silent, his eyes downcast, processing the revelation of his father's betrayal. As the initial shock subsided, a flurry of questions and accusations filled the air. The cracks in our family's foundation had been exposed, and the road ahead would be far from easy. But in that moment, I knew I had made the right decision. I refused to be a victim any longer. I would face the challenges head-on, with the love and support of my children by my side. The confrontation had opened a new chapter in our lives, one filled with uncertainty and pain. But it was also a chapter of truth, of reclaiming my dignity and self-worth. As I looked into Harold's eyes, I saw a man I no longer recognized. The love and trust we had once shared had been shattered, replaced by the bitter reality of his deceit. There would be no turning back now. The journey ahead would be difficult, but I was ready to fight for the life I deserved, free from the shadows of betrayal. In the aftermath of the confrontation with Harold, I found myself sitting in the living room, my mind reeling from the events that had transpired. The weight of his betrayal pressed down on me, threatening to crush my very soul. As I sat there, lost in thought, Claire walked in and sat beside me, her presence a comforting balm to my wounded heart. "Mom, you don't have to put up with this," she said, her voice filled with concern and determination. "You deserve so much better than what Dad has done to you." I looked at my daughter, tears welling up in my eyes. "I know, Claire, but it's not that simple. We've been married for 35 years. I never thought he would be capable of something like this." Claire took my hand in hers, squeezing it gently. "I understand, Mom, but you can't let him get away with it. You can't let him continue to hurt you like this." As we talked, Claire began to recount past incidents of Harold's erratic behavior. The late nights at the office, the secretive phone calls, the unexplained absences. Each revelation felt like a knife twisting in my gut, confirming the suspicions I had tried so hard to ignore. "Remember when he missed your birthday dinner last year?" Claire asked, her brow furrowed. "He claimed he had to work late, but I saw him at the mall with a woman I didn't recognize." My heart sank further as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. The extent of Harold's deceit was far greater than I had initially realized. Blood began to boil within me as the anger and betrayal consumed my thoughts. "I can't believe I was so blind," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of sadness and rage. "How could I have let this go on for so long?" Claire wrapped her arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. "It's not your fault, Mom. Dad is the one who chose to betray your trust. You didn't do anything wrong." Her words provided a glimmer of comfort amidst the darkness that had engulfed my world. I knew I had to be strong, not just for myself, but for my children as well. They deserved a mother who fought for what was right, who refused to be a victim of her husband's selfish actions. "You're right, Claire," I said, my resolve strengthening with each passing moment. "I can't let your father's betrayal define me. I have to stand up for myself and for our family." Claire nodded, a fierce determination in her eyes. "We'll get through this together, Mom. I'll be by your side every step of the way." As we sat there, plotting our next move, I felt a sense of empowerment rising within me. I had spent too many years living in the shadow of Harold's lies and deceit. It was time to take back control of my life, to rebuild what he had so carelessly destroyed. "First things first," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "I'm going to file for divorce. I won't let him continue to manipulate and control me." Claire smiled, pride shining in her eyes. "That's the mom I know and love, strong, resilient, and ready to fight for what she deserves." With my daughter's support and the truth finally exposed, I knew I had the strength to face the challenges that lay ahead. Harold's betrayal had shattered our family, but it had also awakened a fire within me, a determination to rise above the pain and forge a new path for myself. As Claire and I continued to talk, planning our next steps, I felt a sense of hope blossoming amidst the chaos. The road ahead would be difficult, but I knew I had the love and support of my children to guide me through the darkness. Harold's secrets had been brought to light, and now it was time for me to reclaim my life, to build a future free from the shadows of his betrayal. With each passing moment, my resolve grew stronger, fueled by the love and loyalty of my daughter. Together we would weather this storm and emerge stronger, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The journey of healing and empowerment had only just begun, but I knew I was no longer alone in this fight. Just as I thought, the storm of Harold's betrayal couldn't get any worse. An unexpected visitor arrived at my doorstep. Beatrice, Harold's overbearing mother, barged into my home without so much as a hello, her face etched with disapproval and contempt. "You should have kept your family affairs in check, Ellen. It's all your fault Harold strayed," she said, her voice dripping with venom. I stood there, stunned by her audacity. How dare she come into my home and accuse me of being responsible for Harold's infidelity? Anger bubbled up inside me, threatening to spill over. "Excuse me, Beatrice, but I don't think you have any right to come here and blame me for your son's actions," I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. Beatrice scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "Please, Ellen. If you had been a better wife, Harold wouldn't have had to seek comfort elsewhere. You've always been too focused on your own needs, neglecting your duties as a spouse." Her words cut deep, reopening wounds I thought had long since healed. Memories of the countless sacrifices I had made for our family, the years I had devoted to being a loving wife and mother, all came rushing back. "How dare you?" I said, my voice rising with each word. "I have given everything to this family, to Harold. I have been by his side through thick and thin, and this is how he repays me? By betraying our marriage vows and seeking solace in the arms of another woman?" Beatrice remained unmoved, her face a mask of cold indifference. "You have no one to blame but yourself, Ellen. If you had been more attentive, more understanding, none of this would have happened." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The audacity of this woman to come into my home and spew such vile accusations. It was as if she had completely disregarded the pain and heartbreak her son had inflicted upon me. "Get out of my house, Beatrice," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I will not stand here and listen to you defend Harold's despicable actions. He made his choice, and now he must face the consequences." Beatrice's eyes flashed with anger, but she remained rooted in place. "You're making a mistake, Ellen. Harold is a good man, and you're throwing away a lifetime of marriage over a simple indiscretion." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head in disbelief. "A simple indiscretion? Is that what you call betraying your spouse, lying to your family, and destroying the trust that holds a marriage together?" The room fell silent, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Beatrice and I stood there, locked in a battle of wills, neither of us willing to back down. Finally, Beatrice spoke, her voice cold and unforgiving. "You mark my words, Ellen. You'll regret this decision. Harold is the best thing that ever happened to you, and you're throwing it all away." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. I stood there, trembling with a mixture of anger and exhaustion, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. But amidst the chaos and the pain, a newfound resolve began to take hold. Beatrice's visit had only strengthened my determination to break free from the toxic influence of Harold and his family. I refused to be a victim any longer, to be blamed for the actions of a man who had so carelessly thrown away our life together. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders as I prepared for the battle ahead. Harold and Beatrice may have thought they could break me, but they had underestimated the strength that lay within. I would fight for my dignity, for my right to a life free from betrayal and deceit. With each passing moment, my resolve grew stronger, fueled by the love and support of my children and the knowledge that I deserved better. I would not let Harold's betrayal define me, nor would I allow Beatrice's cruel words to shake my determination. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. I had the truth on my side, and I would not rest until justice was served and my family was free from the shadows of Harold's betrayal. The confrontation with Beatrice had left me emotionally drained, but it had also ignited a fire within me. I knew I couldn't let Harold's betrayal continue to poison our family. It was time to take a stand, to put an end to the lies and deceit that had plagued our marriage for far too long. Late that night, I found myself in our bedroom, waiting for Harold to return home. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. When he finally walked through the door, I was ready, my resolve unwavering. "We need to talk, Harold," I said, my voice steady and firm. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "Can't this wait until morning, Ellen? I'm exhausted." I shook my head, standing my ground. No, it can't wait. I've had enough of your lies and betrayal. I know about the affair, and I won't tolerate it any longer. Harold's face paled, and for a moment I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by anger, his features twisting into a scowl. You've crossed the line, Harold. It's over, I said, my voice rising with each word. I want a divorce. He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. You think you can just end our marriage, just like that? You're nothing without me, Ellen. You'll be lost without my support. I felt a surge of anger course through my veins, and I stepped forward, my eyes blazing with fury. I am not nothing, Harold. I am a strong, capable woman who has given everything to this family, and I will not let you treat me like a doormat any longer. He moved towards me, his hand raised as if to strike me, but before he could make contact, Claire burst into the room, her eyes wide with fear and anger. Don't you dare lay a hand on her, Dad, she shouted, placing herself between us. Mom is right. You've crossed the line, and we won't stand for it anymore. Harold's face contorted with rage, and he lunged forward, trying to push past Claire. But she stood her ground, her eyes blazing with determination. I'm moving in with Mom, she declared, her voice unwavering. We're going to support each other through this, and you won't be able to hurt her anymore. Harold's eyes darted between us, realization dawning on his face. He knew he had lost, that his carefully constructed web of lies was crumbling around him. You'll regret this, he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. You'll both regret turning against me. With that, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Claire and I stood there, trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. We had done it. We had stood up to Harold, and we had won. But even as the adrenaline coursed through my veins, I knew that this was only the beginning. Harold would not go down without a fight, and we had to be prepared for whatever he might throw our way. Claire wrapped her arms around me, holding me tight. We're in this together, Mom, she whispered, her voice filled with love and support. We'll get through this, no matter what. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that there would be challenges and obstacles at every turn. But with Claire by my side, I felt a newfound strength rising within me. We had taken the first step towards freedom, towards a life free from Harold's toxic influence, and we would not rest until we had achieved that goal, no matter the cost. As the night wore on, Claire and I sat together, planning our next move. We knew that we had to be strategic, that we had to gather evidence and build a case against Harold. But even as we plotted and schemed, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life, that I was no longer a prisoner of Harold's lies and deceit. The breaking point had been reached, and there was no turning back now. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but I knew that with the love and support of my daughter, I could face anything that came my way. As Claire and I settled into our new apartment, the weight of the past few weeks began to lift from my shoulders. We had taken the first step towards freedom, towards a life free from Harold's lies and deceit. But even as we unpacked our belongings and started to make this place our own, I knew that our journey was far from over. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, Claire looked at me with a determined glint in her eye. We're going to make sure he regrets every betrayal, Mom, she said, her voice filled with a quiet fury. I nodded, my own anger simmering just beneath the surface. You're right, Claire. We can't let him get away with what he's done, not just to me, but to our family, to the life we built together. We began to brainstorm, plotting our next move. We knew that we needed evidence, something concrete that would expose Harold's infidelity and deceitfulness to the world. I've been thinking, Claire said, her brow furrowed in concentration. What if we reached out to the other women Dad has been involved with? If we can get them to come forward to share their stories, it would be impossible for him to deny the truth. I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. That's a brilliant idea, Claire. If we can show a pattern of behavior, a history of lies and betrayal, it will be much harder for him to wriggle out of the consequences. We spent the next few days reaching out to the women Harold had wronged, gathering their stories and their evidence. Each conversation left me feeling more empowered, more determined to see this through to the end. As we pieced together the puzzle of Harold's deceit, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. For too long, I had been living in the shadows of his lies, allowing his actions to dictate the course of my life. But now, with Claire by my side and the truth on our side, I knew that I had the strength to fight back. We compiled the evidence, creating a dossier that laid bare the extent of Harold's betrayals. Photographs, text messages, emails, all of it painted a picture of a man who had no regard for the sanctity of his marriage vows, who had no qualms about destroying the lives of those closest to him. As I flipped through the pages of the dossier, I felt a sense of empowerment wash over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny, like I was no longer a prisoner of Harold's whims and desires. Claire placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, her eyes shining with pride. "You're so brave, Mom," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I know this hasn't been easy, but I'm so proud of you for standing up for yourself, for refusing to be a victim any longer." I smiled, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you, Claire. Your support, your love, it's what's kept me going through all of this." We spent the rest of the evening planning our next move, discussing how we would confront Harold with the evidence we had gathered. We knew that it wouldn't be easy, that he would likely fight back with everything he had. But we also knew that we had the truth on our side, that we had the support of each other and the other women he had wronged. And with that knowledge, we felt an unshakable sense of resolve, a determination to see this through to the end. As the night wore on and we retired to our respective bedrooms, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, like I was finally on the path towards the life I deserved. And with Claire by my side, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, no matter what obstacles Harold might throw in our way, we would face them together, united in our quest for justice and our desire to rebuild our lives on our own terms. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. Claire and I had spent weeks gathering evidence, reaching out to the other women Harold had wronged, and preparing for this moment. As we walked into the local community center, where Harold was attending a charity function, I felt a sense of nervous anticipation thrumming through my veins. We had chosen this event carefully, knowing that it would be attended by many of the town's most influential people. Harold had always been so concerned with his reputation, with maintaining the facade of the perfect husband and father. But today, we would shatter that illusion, exposing the truth of his deceit and betrayal for all to see. As we entered the main hall, I spotted Harold across the room, schmoozing with a group of his colleagues. He looked so smug, so self-assured, as if he had no idea of the storm that was about to descend upon him. Claire squeezed my hand, her eyes shining with determination. "Are you ready, Mom?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, steeling myself for what was to come. "Let's do this," I said, my voice steady and resolute. We made our way to the front of the room, where a small stage had been set up for the evening's presentations. As we approached the microphone, I could feel the eyes of the crowd upon us, curious and expectant. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice ringing out clear and strong. "I know many of you are here to support a worthy cause, but I'm afraid I have some troubling news to share with you tonight." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. I could see Harold's face, his expression shifting from confusion to anger as he realized what was happening. "For years, my husband Harold has been living a double life," I continued, my voice unwavering. "He has been unfaithful to me, to our marriage, and to the vows we made to each other 35 years ago. A gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by a buzz of whispers and murmurs. I could see the shock and disbelief on the faces of those around us, the realization that the man they had thought they knew was not who he appeared to be. "But don't just take my word for it," I said, gesturing to Claire. "We have gathered evidence, testimonies from the women he has wronged, that paint a picture of a man who has no regard for the sanctity of marriage, who has no qualms about destroying the lives of those closest to him." Claire stepped forward, holding up the dossier we had compiled. We have photographs, text messages, emails, all proving the extent of Harold's betrayal, she said, her voice ringing with righteous anger. He has lied to us, to all of you, for years, and it's time for the truth to come out. I could see Harold's face turning red, his fists clenched at his sides. He started to move towards us, his eyes blazing with fury, but he was held back by a group of his colleagues, their faces etched with shock and disgust. The truth always comes out, Harold, I said, my voice filled with a quiet triumph. And now, everyone here knows the kind of man you really are. The room erupted into chaos, people shouting questions and accusations, demanding answers from Harold. But he stood there, frozen, his reputation crumbling around him like a house of cards. As Claire and I watched the scene unfold, I felt a sense of vindication wash over me. For so long I had suffered in silence, bearing the weight of Harold's betrayal on my shoulders. But now, the truth was out, and he would have to face the consequences of his actions. I knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be challenges and obstacles to overcome. But with Claire by my side and the support of the community behind us, I felt a renewed sense of strength and determination. This was my moment, my chance to reclaim my life and my dignity. And I would not let it slip away, not now, not ever again. As the dust settled in the wake of Harold's public exposure, Claire and I found ourselves in a new chapter of our lives. We had moved into a cozy new home, leaving behind the painful memories and toxic energy of the past. The sun streamed through the windows, bathing the room in a warm, inviting glow, a perfect reflection of the hope and possibility that now stretched out before us. Claire and I sat at the kitchen table, sipping our morning coffee and reveling in the peace and tranquility of our new surroundings. The weight of the past few months had lifted from our shoulders, replaced by a sense of liberation and empowerment that was both exhilarating and terrifying. "We're finally free, Mom," Claire said, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and excitement. "What do you want to do next?" I took a deep breath, considering her question. For so long, my life had been defined by Harold's betrayal, by the pain and heartbreak that had consumed me. But now, with the truth exposed and the community rallying behind us, I felt like I could finally breathe again, like I could finally start living life on my own terms. "I want to focus on myself," I said, my voice filled with a newfound sense of determination. "I want to rediscover who I am, what I want out of life. I've spent so many years living in the shadow of Harold's lies, putting his needs and desires before my own. But now it's time for me to put myself first." Claire reached across the table, squeezing my hand in a gesture of support and understanding. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Mom. You deserve to be happy, to pursue your own dreams and passions." We spent the rest of the morning brainstorming ideas, dreaming up plans for the future. I talked about taking a painting class, something I had always wanted to do, but had never found the time for. Claire suggested we take a trip together, maybe to the beach or the mountains, somewhere we could relax and recharge. As we talked and laughed, I felt a sense of joy and contentment that I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, surrounded by love and support, free from the chains of the past. Of course, I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges and obstacles to overcome, moments of doubt and uncertainty. But with Claire by my side and a newfound sense of purpose in my heart, I knew that I could face whatever lay ahead with courage and resilience. In the days and weeks that followed, Claire and I threw ourselves into our new lives with gusto. We explored our new neighborhood, trying out local restaurants and shops, meeting new people, and making new friends. I signed up for that painting class, discovering a hidden talent and passion that I never knew I possessed. And through it all, we leaned on each other for support and encouragement, celebrating each other's successes and picking each other up when we stumbled. The bond between us had always been strong, but now it felt unbreakable, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the love and loyalty that had seen us through the darkest of times. As I looked around our cozy new home, filled with the laughter and warmth of my daughter, I felt a sense of gratitude and wonder wash over me. I had lost so much, endured so much pain and heartbreak, but in the end I had gained something far more precious. a second chance at life, an opportunity to start anew and build a future filled with joy, love, and purpose. And as the sun set on another day, casting a golden glow across the horizon, I knew that no matter what the future held, I would face it with my head held high and my heart full of hope. For the first time in my life, I was truly free, and that was a gift beyond measure.
The first time I laid eyes on Michael was at a college seminar. We were both there for extra credits, though our paths were quite different. He was a business major, while I was pursuing literature. I was drawn to him from the moment he raised his hand and posed a challenging question to the professor. After class, we found ourselves at the same coffee shop, and from there, it just seemed like the universe wanted us to be together. We chatted about everything from college hobbies to our childhood memories. I come from a pretty strict background, he mentioned, taking a sip from his cup. My parents are deeply religious. I remember shrugging. So my parents are freethinkers. They always taught me to question everything, I replied. Sounds like we're from different planets, he laughed. But despite our differences, there was an undeniable chemistry. We began to see each other more frequently, studying together and exploring the city during the weekends. About 2 years into our relationship, we decided to move in together. It was a practical decision. Our apartments were far from the university, and sharing a place made sense. Plus, we were inseparable by then. However, when Michael broke the news to his parents, it wasn't received well. At a dinner at their house, Mrs. Davis, Michael's mother, was the first to voice her concerns. "Living together before marriage, Michael, you know how we feel about that," she said. "Mom, times have changed. It's not a big deal," Michael replied. "In our house, it is. You're living in sin," Mr. Davis chimed in. The evening ended on a somber note, but Michael and I were firm in our decision. We found a cozy apartment close to campus and moved in. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and our bond grew stronger. But the strain with his parents was always in the background, like an old radio playing a sad tune. One evening, as we were settling into our new life, there was a knock on the door. It was Mrs. Davis, holding a pie. "I thought I'd come by and see how you two are doing," she said, looking around with a critical eye. "We're doing great, Mrs. Davis," I replied, trying to be cordial. She sat down, placing the pie on the table. "This is all temporary, right? You'll get married soon," she said. Michael cleared his throat. "We haven't decided that yet, Mom." As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the constant pressure from Michael's parents started to weigh on us. Our once carefree dates and movie nights began to have a shadow, the looming expectation of marriage. One evening, while we were making dinner together in our tiny kitchen, Michael broached the subject. "Lizzie, have you ever thought about, having a wedding?" he asked. I looked up from chopping the vegetables, surprised. "Like for us? Are you proposing?" He smiled awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Not exactly. I mean, yes, I want to marry you someday, but right now it's more about my parents. Maybe if we had a ceremony, they'd back off." "So you're saying a wedding without the legal paperwork?" I asked. He nodded. "Just a thought. We can invite friends, make it a fun day. My parents get their wedding, and we get some peace." It wasn't the romantic proposal I'd imagined, but I understood his reasoning. "All right," I said slowly. "But on one condition, we do it our way. No big church wedding, just something small and intimate." Michael grinned, relief evident on his face. "Deal." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparations. We chose a beautiful outdoor venue, invited our close friends and family, and planned a simple but heartfelt ceremony. When we broke the news to his parents, their reaction was surprisingly subdued. "An outdoor wedding?" Mrs. Davis asked, raising an eyebrow. "Well, it's unconventional, but if it means you two are taking the next step, I suppose we can support it." Mr. Davis added, "As long as you're committed to each other, that's what matters." The day of the wedding was sunny and bright. I wore a simple white dress, and Michael looked dashing in his suit. Our friends cheered, and even Michael's parents seemed genuinely happy. During the reception, Mrs. Davis pulled me aside. "Lizzie, I want to apologize," she began, her voice soft. "I know we've been hard on you two, but seeing you together today..." I realized that love is what truly matters. I smiled, touched by her words. "Thank you, Mrs. Davis. That means a lot." The day ended on a high note, with everyone dancing and celebrating our love. It felt like we had finally won Michael's parents over, and I hoped this would be a fresh start for us. But as days passed, their daily visits began. They'd drop by unannounced, often with unsolicited advice or thinly veiled criticisms. It was as if the wedding had given them a free pass to interfere in our lives. One evening, as Michael and I were unwinding after a long day, there was a knock at the door. Opening it, I found Mrs. Davis holding a casserole dish. "Just thought I'd drop off some dinner," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks," I replied, taking the dish. "But you know you don't have to do this." She waved a hand dismissively. "It's no trouble. I just thought since you're always so busy, you might not have time to cook." I forced a smile, sensing the underlying judgment. "We manage, but thanks anyway." As the door closed, I sighed deeply. Michael wrapped an arm around me. "It'll be okay?" he whispered. It started with subtle comments, the not-so-innocent questions. "Why is the house so messy?" Or, "Have you considered cooking something more nutritious?" Mrs. Davis would ask, her tone dripping with faux concern. One day, I came home from work exhausted to find her in our living room, reorganizing our bookshelves. "Mrs. Davis, what are you doing?" I asked, taken aback. She looked up as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "Just thought I'd help tidy up a bit. These shelves looked so cluttered." Michael entered from the kitchen, holding 2 cups of tea. "Mom's just helping out, Lizzie," he said, trying to play mediator. I took a deep breath, my patience waning. "This is our home, Michael. We didn't ask for help." Mrs. Davis pursed her lips, her eyes watering. "I'm just trying to be helpful after all. Now, we're family." Days like these became more frequent. They'd pop by without notice, giving advice we never asked for, criticizing decisions we'd made together as a couple. It was clear they no longer saw boundaries. One evening, after a particularly trying visit from his parents, Mikkel and I sat down for a heart-to-heart. "Mikkel, this has to stop," I began, my voice trembling with frustration. "I can't live like this, feeling like I'm constantly being judged in my own home." He ran his fingers through his hair, looking equally stressed. "I know, Lizzie. It's just, they're my parents. I don't know how to tell them to back off without hurting their feelings." "But what about our feelings? Our peace of mind? We can't keep sacrificing that for them." A week later, we invited them over for dinner, deciding to address the issue head-on. The evening started off pleasantly enough. We chatted about work, friends, and the latest news. But as the main course was served, I took a deep breath and dove in. "Mrs. Davis, Mr. Davies, we invited you over because there's something we need to discuss," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Mr. Davis looked up, his fork pausing mid-air. "What's the matter?" It's about the frequent visits and, well, the constant input on our lives, I continued. Mrs. Davis looked taken aback. We're just trying to help. Michael took over. Mom, Dad, we appreciate that you care, but it's becoming overwhelming. We need some space to live our lives, make our mistakes, and grow together. Tears formed in Mrs. Davis's eyes. After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us? Mr. Davis added, his voice stern. We're just looking out for you. It seems Lizzie here doesn't appreciate family, Mrs. Davis said. Her tone hurt. I felt a pang of guilt, but stood my ground. It's not about appreciation. It's about respect. Respect in our boundaries and our choices. The room grew silent, the tension palpable. Mrs. Davis dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, her shoulders shaking. We just wanted to be part of your lives. I never thought it had come to this. Michael looked torn, his loyalty divided, but he held firm. Mom, we love you, but this is our life. We need you to understand that. The evening ended with Mrs. Davis in tears, Mr. Davis looking disappointed, and an unspoken agreement that things had to change. As they left, I felt a mix of relief and dread, wondering what the future held for our relationships. Days after the confrontation, the house felt unusually quiet. The constant visits had stopped, but the silence was both a relief and a curse. Every time the doorbell rang or there was a knock, my heart would race, expecting it to be Michael's parents, but it never was. One evening, as Michael and I sat on our couch, he broached the topic. Lizzie, do you think we were too harsh? I mean, they're my parents. Maybe we overreacted. I took his hand, feeling its warmth. Michael, it's not about being harsh. It's about setting boundaries. We did what we had to do. He sighed deeply. I know. It's just hard. I never imagined being in this situation with them. As days turned into weeks, we began to feel the weight of our decision. There were no more surprise visits, but there were also no calls or messages. It was as if we had cut ties completely. During this period, I often found solace in browsing property listings online. One day, as I was scrolling through, a beautiful house in a neighboring town caught my eye. It had a large garden, a spacious living area, and most importantly, it was far away from our current life. Michael, come look at this, I called out. He joined me, peering at the screen. Wow, it's beautiful. But why are you looking at houses? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I was thinking maybe it's time for a fresh start. Somewhere new where we can create our own memories, away from all this drama. He looked surprised. You mean move? Leave everything behind? I nodded. It's drastic, I know. But maybe it's what we need. We discussed it at length, weighing the pros and cons. The idea of starting anew was enticing, but also terrifying. Yet the more we talked, the more it felt right. A few weeks later, we visited the house. It was even more beautiful in person, and the neighborhood seemed perfect. After much consideration, I decided to use the money I had inherited from my grandmother to buy it. The day we signed the papers, I felt a mix of emotions. Excitement for the new beginning, but also sadness for what we were leaving behind. The move went smoothly, and soon we were settling into our new home. It felt like a dream. The peace and quiet were just what we needed. One evening, as we were enjoying a quiet dinner in our new dining room, Michael said, Lizzie, I think this was the best decision we ever made. I smiled, feeling content. I think so too. The first few months in our new home were like a dream. The mornings were quiet, filled with the chirping of birds, and the evenings brought a calm, tranquil energy. Michael and I fell into a comfortable routine, enjoying the privacy and peace that our new surroundings provided. The past seemed like a distant memory, and the attention that once surrounded our lives had all but disappeared until one fateful day. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. Michael went to answer it. I heard murmurs and then a familiar voice. My heart sank. It was Mrs. Davis. I walked to the entrance, my face revealing my shock. There they were, Mrs. and Mr. Davis, suitcases in tow, standing at our doorstep. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" Michael asked, his voice filled with surprise. Mrs. Davis smiled a bit too sweetly. "We missed you, dear, and we thought, why not pay a visit?" I tried to keep my composure. "It's unexpected," Mr. Davis chimed in. "We just wanted to see where our son is living now. Is that so wrong?" Michael seemed torn. "Of course not, but a heads up would have been nice." Mrs. Davis looked around, her eyes scanning our home. "Oh, what a lovely place you have here. Much nicer than the old one." I bristled but said nothing. The visit turned into a stay. One night became 2, then 3. They began to settle in, making themselves comfortable, much like they had in our previous home. One evening, after dinner, I pulled Michael aside. "Michael, we can't go down this road again. We moved to escape this." He sighed. "I know, Lizzie, but they're my parents. I can't just throw them out." "Then what? Let them take over our lives again?" Mrs. Davis, who seemed to have overheard our conversation, walked over, her eyes welling up with tears. "Is that how you feel, Michael? That we're a burden?" Michael looked helplessly at me, then back at his mother. "Mom, it's not like that. We just wish you had told us you were coming." She sniffled. "We just wanted to be close to our son, but it seems we're not welcome here either." I had a sinking feeling when I heard Michael's parents mention they'd made a decision about their living situation. The two of us had recently been discussing the matter privately, hoping to find a delicate way to address the issue. Now it seemed the matter was going to be thrust into the open. "Lizzie, Michael," Mr. Davis began, "we have some news." Michael shifted in his seat, already sensing what was coming. "Go on," he prompted. Mrs. Davis, trying to sound cheerful, said, "We've sold our house. We realize there's no need for it when we have such a lovely family home here with you two." My eyes widened in shock. "You did what?" "We wanted to be closer to you both," Mr. Davis explained, looking earnest. Mrs. Davis looked hurt. "We are family. Why wouldn't you want us here?" I took a deep breath and said what I'd wanted to say for a long time. "This house, it's mine. It's not owned jointly by Michael and me. It's in my name only." I retrieved a file from the study, showing them the ownership documents. Mrs. Davis looked at the papers and then back at me, clearly stunned. "But you're married. What's yours is Michael's and vice versa," she exclaimed. I smiled triumphantly. "That's where you're mistaken. We held a wedding ceremony, yes, but Michael and I never legally married. We never signed any official documents. So technically, you're not my in-laws." The weight of my words seemed to hang in the air. Mrs. Davis's face turned a shade paler, her eyes widening in disbelief. Mr. Davis looked from me to Michael, seeking some form of denial. Michael took my hand, signaling his support. "It's true, Mom and Dad. We thought you'd be more accepting if we had a ceremony, but we never felt the need to get the state involved in our relationship." Mrs. Davis began to sob. "So you deceived us, and now you're throwing us out?" The room was heavy with tension after the bombshells were dropped. Michael's parents were clearly taken aback, but it wasn't long before the shock turned into outrage. "So, you tricked everyone with a sham wedding, and you think that makes everything all right?" Mrs. Davis's voice had a hint of venom. Michael sighed. It wasn't about tricking anyone. It was about the way we wanted to live our lives. The ceremony was for us and those who wanted to celebrate our love. Mrs. Davis's face turned a shade redder. You dare defy the sanctity of marriage, live together in sin, and then mock us with a fake wedding? I've had enough. Mr. Davis declared, standing up suddenly. You, young lady, are nothing but a sinner and a witch, trying to pull my son away from his family, his values. I was taken aback by the fierceness of their reaction, but I wouldn't let them intimidate me. I have not taken Michael from anyone. He's made his own choices, and it's high time you respect them. Mrs. Davis's eyes were filled with tears, but her voice was stern. Michael, come home with us. Leave this woman. She's done nothing but pull you into her web of deceit. Michael, ever the calm in the storm, replied, Mom, Dad, I love you both, but my place is here with her. She's been nothing but kind and understanding, even when you both haven't been. You can't just demand I leave her. You're choosing her over us. Mr. Davis's voice was a mix of anger and disbelief. I'm choosing to live my life on my terms, Dad. I'm choosing to be with Lizzie. The room went silent for what felt like an eternity. The air was thick, every breath heavy. Mrs. Davis's face was a mask of hurt and betrayal. Very well, she said, her voice cold. But remember this. You're turning your back on your family, on your faith, all for her. I'm not turning my back on anyone, Michael said firmly. I just wish you'd see that. Mrs. Davis's eyes were hard, her voice bitter. Let us go, she said to her husband, not giving either of us another glance. And with that they left, leaving behind a wake of hurt, confusion, and uncertainty. I looked at Michael, his face a mirror of my own feelings. We both knew that things had changed irrevocably, and there was no going back. A few days after the confrontation, as I was heading back from work, my neighbor, Mrs. Carlson, called out to me. She was an older lady known for her daily walks and her uncanny ability to know everyone's business. Did you hear about the Davis family not selling their house? She asked with a knowing look. I paused, taken aback. What do you mean? She leaned closer, lowering her voice. They never put their house on the market. I heard from Susan, who heard from Janice, who works at the town's real estate office. There's no record of the Davis property being up for sale. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Were they lying to us all this time? When I got home, I shared the information with Michael. He looked shocked. I can't believe they'd lie to us. What were they trying to achieve? We both knew the answer. They wanted to manipulate the situation to their advantage. The realization was a hard pill to swallow. All this time, while we tried to understand and accommodate them, they had been playing a game. Michael sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. This changes things. It's one thing to have disagreements, but outright deception, that's something else entirely. We can't keep letting them pull us into their manipulative games, I said firmly. We need boundaries, strong ones. Michael nodded. You're right. We can't continue like this. It's unhealthy for us and for our relationship. The next day he went over to his parents' house. He needed to confront them, get some answers. When he returned, his face was a mix of anger and sadness. They admitted it, he began, his voice heavy. They thought that if they moved in with us, we'd be a proper family again. They felt threatened by our independence. We sat down, discussing our next steps. It was clear that for our own sanity and the health of our relationship, we needed distance from them. We need a break, Michael declared. Some time away from all this drama and manipulation? I agreed. It's the best decision for us right now. That evening, we sent a message to his parents, informing them of our decision. The reply was filled with anger and accusations, but we remained firm. We needed this for ourselves and for our future. The next few weeks were quiet. We focused on each other, rebuilding the trust and closeness that had been strained over the past months. One evening, as we sat on our porch, looking at the stars, Michael turned to me. "Thank you," he whispered, "for standing by me, for fighting for us." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "Always." The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it was a poignant reminder of the importance of boundaries, honesty, and mutual respect in any relationship. As the night deepened, we looked toward the future, hoping for peace and understanding.
I was prepared for yet another lengthy shift when I entered the veterinary hospital that day. I considered the location to be a second home, a sanctuary where my love of animals could flourish and my humble upbringing was forgotten. I had no idea that my entire world was going to turn upside down. He was there talking to one of our experienced nurses, Janet, while resting against the front counter. I was instantly drawn in by his easy, sincere laughing that filled the room. When he grinned, I couldn't help but notice how warm his eyes were. "Can I help you?" I walked up to them with a mixture of professional courtesy and curiosity and inquired. "Oh, I just wanted to say thank you to Janet for looking after Whiskers last week." He looked at me and said, "You guys do amazing work." There was an immediate spark, an unsaid bond that I sensed from the bottom of my heart. He continued, "I'm Jaren," and held out his hand, which I shook, experiencing a shock of energy. "I'm Carol," I said, sounding more composed than I actually was. "I'm happy to see that Whiskers is improving. Making sure they receive the care they require is our responsibility." Jaren grinned broadly as he nodded. "Your enthusiasm for your work is evident to me. It's motivating. I'm here to volunteer, actually. I want to lend a hand however I can." I was caught off guard by his disclosure. Volunteers were plenty, but Jaren had a genuineness about him that was impossible to replicate. His straightforward demeanor was refreshing, particularly when he revealed that he was from a wealthy family. He casually brought up the fact, as though it were the least fascinating aspect about him. We worked side by side for the remainder of the afternoon, Jaren getting into the work with a charming, if not comical, fervor. He took on any task, no matter how filthy, from feeding the animals to cleaning their cages. Things between Jaren and myself began to move at a rate that neither of us had anticipated, but that we both secretly hoped for after our initial encounter at the veterinary hospital. Our first bond over the animals soon developed into something more, something concrete and genuine. Our first date was straightforward. I had never noticed the small, quaint cafe that Jaren took me to, even though I had passed it 1,000 times. The location was authentic and unassuming, reflecting who we were. We learned about the various ways our lives intersected over cups of coffee that became cold due to our intense chat. We were quite the couple, weren't we, from our shared appreciation of vintage films to our remarkable ability to recite passages from obscure novels. Jaren laughed and quoted a passage from one of my favorite novels, which I had mentioned in casually. His eyes were glistening with laughter. His recollection and effort astonished and delighted me, and I laughed. "Yeah, a regular Bonnie and Clyde," I replied snappily. However, our common interests and the easy laughs we shared brought us together rather than crime. Our relationship became stronger with each passing date. Simple activities like going for a stroll in the park, visiting a nearby animal shelter, or simply spending time together in solitude while feeling at ease with one another brought us happiness. I saw a glimpse of the real Jaren in these occasions. The individual responsible for the money and the associated expectations. His kindness, compassion, and sincere desire to change the world were traits that aligned with my own goals and ideals. I couldn't help but feel thankful for that fortuitous meeting at the veterinarian clinic as those early dates grew into weeks, and then months. I approached the milestone of meeting Jaren's parents with a mixture of joy and anxiety. As we drove up to his family's home, the butterflies in my stomach grew more numerous than Jaren's assurances. It was magnificent, a great cry from the modest settings I was used to, and a clear reminder of how different our worlds were. As we approached the entrance, Jaren squeezed my hand. His grin was reassuring, but couldn't totally calm me down. He said, "They're going to love you," as his parents appeared through the open door. His father, Mr. Eldridge, was the first to greet us, his demeanor warm and welcoming. "Jaren, my boy, and you must be Carol. We've heard so much about you," he said, extending a hand that enveloped mine in a firm, friendly shake. "Thank you for having me, Mr. Eldridge. It's a pleasure to meet you," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Then came Martha, Mrs. Eldridge, the woman who would soon become my infamous mother-in-law. Her appearance was impeccable, but her eyes scrutinized me in a way that made me feel like I was back in high school, desperately trying to fit in with the cool crowd. "So Carol, Jaren tells us you worked at a veterinary clinic. That must be interesting," she began, her tone implying that interesting was a euphemism for less than impressive. "Yes, Mrs. Eldridge. It's very fulfilling work." "I've always loved animals," I answered, trying to keep my voice, even despite the clear judgment in hers. "And your family," Jaren mentioned, "they're from the countryside. Do you visit often?" "I imagine it's quite different from the city life," she continued, each question laced with an underlying critique of my background. "My parents are wonderful people. We're very close, and yes, it's a different pace of life, but it's where I call home," I said, my pride in my roots firm despite her not-so-subtle digs. Dinner was an exercise in maintaining composure. Mrs. Eldridge's comments ranged from backhanded compliments about my quaint upbringing to outright interrogations about whether I had ever traveled abroad or dined in fine restaurants. Each question felt like a test I hadn't studied for, her words designed to highlight our differences rather than find common ground. Jaren, bless him, tried to steer the conversation to safer waters, interjecting with stories of our time together that had everyone laughing, everyone except his mother, who seemed determined to find fault in anything related to me. It was when she asked, "Carol, dear, have you decided on a wedding dress yet? Or are you planning to make do with something homemade?" that I realized this wasn't just about getting to know me. It was about her asserting a perceived superiority, her way of reminding me that I didn't belong. I smiled, a genuine one born of the confidence Jaren's love gave me. "Mrs. Eldridge, I believe a wedding dress should reflect the love and commitment of the couple, not the price tag. Jaren and I are focused on what comes after the wedding, building a life together based on respect, love, and understanding." The silence that followed was palpable. Even Mrs. Eldridge seemed momentarily at a loss, her fork paused midair. Mr. Eldridge, however, nodded in approval, a twinkle in his eye as he looked at me. "Well said, Carol. Well said indeed." The ride home was quiet, but Jaren broke the silence with an apology that was heartfelt yet unnecessary. "I'm sorry about my mom. She can be difficult." I squeezed his hand, a silent acknowledgement of his support. "It's okay, Jaren. Your love is all the validation I need. Together, we'll get through anything." As the wedding preparations unfolded, Martha made it her mission to underline our differences at every turn. Her intrusion wasn't just unwelcome, it was downright aggressive. She had a comment for everything, from the color scheme of the hall to the floral arrangements, and even the style of our invitation cards. One evening, as Jaron and I were finalizing the guest list, Mrs. Eldridge dropped by unannounced. Her eyes scanned our choices with evident disapproval. "You're not seriously considering the shade of green for the decor, are you?" "It's so provincial," she remarked, her nose wrinkled as if she'd smelled something foul. I tried to keep my cool, but her next comment about our guest list set me off. "And these friends of yours, they're hardly the sort one expects at a wedding of our stature. It might be best to leave them off the list, don't you think?" I felt a flash of anger, but managed to keep my voice steady. "Mrs. Eldridge, Jaron and I have decided on the guest list together. Everyone we care about will be there, regardless of their status." Her lips pursed into a thin line, clearly not used to being contradicted. The tension only escalated when she turned her attention to my wedding dress, which I'd chosen for its simplicity and elegance. "That dress," she sniffed, "it's charming, if you're attending a country fair, perhaps. But for a wedding in our family, it's hardly appropriate." I bit back a retort, my hand clenched at my sides. Jaron, sensing the brewing storm, tried to intervene, but his mother was on a roll. "And where are you planning to honeymoon?" "A quaint little barn in the countryside?" she asked, her voice dripping with malice. That was the last straw. "Our honeymoon plans are our business," I shot back, the hurt clear in my voice. "Just like every other decision about this wedding. It's about what makes us happy, not about living up to some outdated standards." Mrs. Eldridge's eyes narrowed, but before she could retort, Jaron stepped in. "Mom, that's enough. This is our wedding, Carol's and mine. We're making the decisions that are right for us. If you can't support that, maybe you should reconsider your involvement in the planning." The room went silent. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mrs. Eldred huffed, muttered something under her breath about speaking later, and stormed out. After she left, the air felt lighter, as if her departure had lifted a weight from the room. Jaron wrapped his arms around me, his apology whispered in my ear. "I'm sorry, Carol. I don't know what's gotten into her." "It's not your fault," I sighed, leaning into his embrace. "But I'm glad you said something. This is our wedding, our day. It should be about us, not about pleasing everyone else." The wedding day, supposed to be the happiest of my life, started off just like I'd always dreamed. The church ceremony was beautiful, filled with love and promise. I stood there in my simple yet elegant dress, feeling truly beautiful and cherished, hand in hand with Jaron, my soon-to-be husband. But amidst the joy, a nagging feeling tugged at me. Glancing over, I caught my mother-in-law's expectant look, her smirk barely hidden. It was clear she was plotting something, but I pushed the thought aside, hoping for the best. The ceremony concluded without a hitch, and as we headed to the reception, I tried to hold on to the happiness of the moment. However, as soon as we arrived, I saw her again, my mother-in-law moving toward the microphone with purpose. My heart sank. With all eyes on her, she began, her voice dripping with faint sweetness. "Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about our newest family member." Her gaze locked with mine, and I felt a chill. Coming from such humble beginnings, it's truly remarkable how resourceful Carol has been. From the village to here, embracing our family with open arms, like a true freeloader. And dare I say, a beggar at our doorstep. The room fell silent, the guests exchanging uncomfortable glances. Even those from Jaron's side, the so-called high society, looked taken aback by her harsh words. I stood frozen, shock giving way to humiliation. Tears blurred my vision as I heard a few gasps, and murmurs ripple through the crowd. Beside me, I could see my parents, their faces flushed with shame, hurt by the cruel words aimed at their daughter. Before I could process everything, Jaron was by my side, his voice filled with anger and apology. "I'm so sorry, Carol. I had no idea she'd stoop this low," he whispered, his arm wrapped around me in support. But before we could react further, an unexpected ally emerged. Jaron's grandmother, a respected matriarch of the family. She stood up, her presence commanding attention enough to cut through the tension. "I cannot believe what I'm hearing," she boomed, her voice cutting through the room. "This woman, who speaks so ill of simplicity and humility, seems to forget her own roots. Did you all know she herself was once nothing more than a servant in our household? And now look how she turns her nose up at those very beginnings." The room erupted in whispers. The tables turned, and my mother-in-law's face went from smug satisfaction to utter horror, her cheeks burning red as the grandmother continued to dismantle her facade of superiority. "This girl, Carol, has shown more grace and dignity than you ever have," the grandmother said, her gaze softening as she looked at me. "She is welcome in our family, not for her background, but for her heart." The reception that followed was a blur. My mother-in-law, now the subject of whispered conversations, left early, her exit barely noticed in the renewed celebration. Jaron was by my side throughout, his apologies unnecessary as his love and support spoke volumes. The room was still buzzing from the grandmother's unexpected defense of me. Guests whispered among themselves, casting sidelong glances at the now absent mother-in-law. Jaron squeezed my hand under the table, a silent promise of solidarity. "Can you believe what just happened?" Jaron asked, his voice a mix of astonishment and relief. I shook my head, still processing the whirlwind of emotions. "No. Jaron, your grandmother, she was incredible. I didn't think anyone would stand up to your mother like that, let alone in such a public way." Jaron smiled, a look of pride crossing his face. "Grandma has always been the matriarch of our family. She doesn't tolerate injustice or cruelty. I guess I forgot how formidable she can be." We were interrupted by the approach of the very woman of the hour, Jaron's grandmother. Her presence commanded respect, yet there was a warmth in her eyes as she looked at us. "Carol, dear, I hope you're feeling better after that unpleasantness," she said, her voice firm but kind. "Thank you, Mrs. Eldred. Your words meant the world to me. I was feeling pretty low, but you've turned the whole evening around," I replied, gratitude swelling in my heart. She waved a hand dismissively. "Nonsense, my dear. It was long overdue. That woman needed to be reminded of her place and to learn respect. You are a part of this family now, and we protect our own." Jaron's father joined us, a sheepish look on his face. "Carol, I'm sorry for my wife's behavior. I hope you can forgive us for any hurt she's caused." I nodded, understanding the difficult position he was in. "Thank you, Mr. Eldred. Today has been a whirlwind, but your family's support has made all the difference." As the evening continued, the atmosphere in the room lightened. Guests came up to us, offering their congratulations, and in some cases, apologies for the earlier drama. It was clear that the tide had turned, not just in terms of the evening's events, but in how I was viewed by Jaron's family and their social circle. Later, as Jaron and I took to the dance floor, I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory, not over his mother, but over the situation. We had faced adversity head-on and come out stronger on the other side. "Jaron," I said as we swayed to the music, "today has been a lot, but I've never been more sure about us. Your family's support, especially your grandmother's, has shown me that we can handle anything together." The atmosphere at Jaron's family home was charged as we gathered for the meeting his grandmother had called after the wedding's tumultuous events. I was anxious about facing everyone again, especially Jaren's mother. However, Jaren squeezed my hand reassuringly as we took our seats in the large living room filled with generations of Eldreds and a palpable tension. Jaren's grandmother, the undeniable matriarch, stood at the head of the room, her presence commanding attention. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady and authoritative. "We're here to address a matter that concerns the dignity and unity of our family." Jaren's mother sat rigid, her eyes darting around the room, perhaps seeking an ally or preparing for a counterattack. Jaren, ever the peacemaker, spoke up first. "Grandma, I know things got out of hand at the wedding. I want to apologize on behalf of—" His grandmother raised a hand, silencing him. "Jaren, my boy, this isn't about placing blame on anyone. It's about setting things right." She then turned her gaze to me. "Carol, you've shown nothing but grace and patience in the face of less than welcoming behavior. For that, you have my respect." I nodded, touched by her words. "Thank you, Mrs. Eldred. I just want what's best for Jaren and to be a part of this family." The room was silent, all eyes on us. Suddenly, Jaren's mother stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I've listened enough. This girl," she gestured wildly towards me, "has turned everyone against me. And you." She pointed accusingly at her mother-in-law, "humiliate me in front of the whole family." Jaren's grandmother remained unfazed. "I stated the truth. You forgot where you came from, and you tried to belittle Carol for her origins. That's not the Eldred way." Jaren's father finally spoke, his voice firm. "Martha, your behavior has been unacceptable. It's time you reflect on your actions and their impact on our family's reputation." The room went quiet again, the weight of his words settling in. Jaren's mother sank back into her chair, her defiance fading. The grandmother continued, "We are a family, and family supports and lifts each other up, not tear each other down. Carol, you are welcome here, always." As the family meeting began to wind down, the air still heavy from the discussions and revelations, Jaren's grandmother, the respected matriarch, had one more issue to address. She cleared her throat, signaling that she wasn't quite finished. "Now there's another matter I need to bring to light," she started, her tone serious, hinting at the gravity of what was to come. From her purse, she pulled out a long list, the paper rustling loudly in the quiet room. "It's come to my attention that Martha's spending has been, to put it mildly, extravagant and irresponsible over the past month." The room fell silent, every pair of eyes fixed on the list that seemed to unroll like a scroll. Jaren's mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her earlier defiance melting into panic. "These expenses," the grandmother continued, "are not only frivolous, but are bleeding our family resources dry. This cannot go on." Martha. Now pale, she looked around, perhaps hoping for an ally, but finding none. She turned to her husband, desperation in her voice. "You can't let her do this to me. You know we need the money." Her husband, a man who had been quiet for most of the meeting, spoke up, his voice firm and devoid of any warmth he might have previously held for her. "I agree with my mother. It's time you learn the value of hard work, Martha. I won't support your lavish lifestyle anymore." Martha's eyes widened, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The realization that she was truly alone in this, that her actions had consequences, seemed to dawn on her. "And if your behavior continues along this path," he added, the threat clear in his tone, "I will have no choice but to seek a divorce. Our family's reputation and well-being come first." The finality in his statement left no room for argument. Martha was visibly shaken, her composure completely shattered. Tears streamed down her face as she looked around the room, perhaps finally understanding the severity of her actions and their impact on those she claimed to love. After our honeymoon, a blissful escape where the world seemed to revolve around just the two of us, Jaren and I returned to a reality that had shifted in our absence. The news that greeted us was unexpected. Jaren's father had divorced Mrs. Eldred. Despite his love for his mother, Jaren stood by his father's decision. Mrs. Eldridge, now living in a modest apartment and grappling with the new necessity of finding employment, seemed a world away from the woman who had looked down on me with such disdain. It was a drastic change in fortune that I wouldn't wish on anyone, despite our past. One afternoon, not long after our return, the phone rang. Expecting it to be Jaren, who had popped out for a short errand, I answered, only to find myself on the line with Mrs. Eldridge. The conversation began awkwardly, her voice cold and tinged with the contempt that had characterized our interactions. "I suppose you're satisfied seeing me in this state?" She started, her words sharp. I held the phone a little tighter, struggling to keep my voice even. "It's not about satisfaction. This was never what I wanted." The tone of her voice changed noticeably as the call went on. Gradually, the haughtiness and contempt gave way to despair. "Hear me out. I need you to speak with the grandma and your father-in-law. Perhaps they will pay attention to you. Tell them I'm sorry and that I'll be different." I was caught off guard by her request. The woman who had previously exalted herself was now pleading for help. It was a moment that exposed the vulnerability behind her formerly impregnable exterior. I inhaled deeply before answering, my choice obvious. "I apologize, but I have no place there. You need to speak with them directly about this. You, not me, should tell them this." I hung up the phone and sat for a while, feeling the pressure of the talk. I told Jaren about it when he got back, not knowing how he would respond. His countenance was attentive as he listened quietly. He paused, then spoke in a stern tone. "You made the correct decision. Even though I adore my mother, she must see the repercussions of her behavior. It's her only chance to change for the better." His backing was reassuring, and our unity grew stronger. Through the difficulties we encountered together, this journey, with all of its detours, had strengthened our relationship and brought us closer. The lessons learned from the past stayed with us as we went forward and built our life together. They served as a reminder of the tenacity of love, the value of forgiveness, and the strength that comes from sticking together despite challenging family dynamics.